welcome back to IGN's History of Awesome, a year-by-year breakdown of big events that shaped pop culture. 1985 is one of the most important years for console gamers far and wide. It's when the Nintendo Entertainment System was finally released in North America, starting a resurgence of the console home market. But since 1985 is so cool, it also blessed us with gems like Back to the Future and the very first WrestleMania. Obviously, a lot was going on, so let's get talking.
And welcome back to another exciting edition of IGN's History of Awesome. I'm Jose Otero, and here to join me for this trip back to 1985, Ryan McCaffrey, Zach Ryan, and Samuel Claiborne.
What's up?
So let's start off with games, guys, because we tend to always start with games. Specifically, 1985 is a major year because the Nintendo Entertainment System launched.
Although a bad year for games, technically. That's right. Because the launch titles are pretty lame.
Debatable. There's some
you
good
like
ones on
Clue
there.
Land?
Big time Clue Land. I'm a Clue Land fan.
Okay.
Yeah, but to set the stage for folks, video games and video game consoles were considered a passing fad in 1985 specifically.
Yeah, people didn't want them on their retail shelves. They were just
exactly.
like, they were like death at retail.
The NES was soft launched in Manhattan.
Well, at this point, the market had already crashed for it, right? Like, people had already decided that home consoles were a thing of the past, and so
that's right.
They took a pretty big gamble bringing the NES out at this time.
Yeah, and you could call it a really calculated gamble, right? Because the soft launch was one example of just saying, okay, let's see. First of all, they picked New York because if we can make it here, you can make it anywhere, right? Just like the Sinatra song. But also then just sort of in terms of picking up the pieces and making sure that what happened to Atari did not happen to Nintendo. And granted, we got the NES 2 years after it had already come out in Japan. That actually was 1983. But you know, we had a pretty decent launch lineup that you can, sort of say was good or was okay. 10-yard fight.
So you
baseball.
went from good to decent to okay.
to okay. All
I'm gonna go with
things.
Pretty lame.
Yeah, it depends on your expectations.
Right,
but 10-yard fight, baseball, Clue Land, Duck Hunt, Donkey Kong Jr. Math, Excitebike,
I love that game.
Golf, Gyromite, Hogan's Alley, Ice Climber, Kung Fu, Mock Rider, Pinball, Stack Up, Tennis, Wild Gunman, and Wrecking Crew.
I'd like to just point out that this is a time in gaming where you can just make a game called Golf. That's great.
Should we start with Duck Hunt? Because Duck Hunt is such, it was always the poor, like, second fiddle on the pack-in combo cart with Super Mario Brothers. You always wanted to play Super Mario Brothers. You never wanted to play, you'd only play Duck Hunt if you were just really sick and tired of playing Super Mario Brothers, but it turns out Duck Hunt was a really good game.
Well, it's funny because you can cheat so easily.
Oh yeah, just walk up to the TV and...
Now, it's weird that is considered a launch title because the original NES only had Rob as a pack-in, and that, of course, required the light gun. So there was different iterations of the NES over the years, but it would have been, unusual to play Duck Hunt at launch if that was even available. But of course, there was a light gun type thing, and that was the Rob the robot. Yeah. And it had Gyromite with it, which was a light gun-ish type thing.
I never had a Rob, and I always, anytime the rare instances I saw one, which I don't even think any of my friends had one, but it would just be like, whoa, that's the, like it was sort of this revered thing to me.
Yeah, same here. After the fact, I would go to somebody's house and be like, oh, you got that version of the Nintendo? Let's hook it up. They're like, no, it's not worth it.
It's not that fun.
That's like the Kinect version of Xbox One. Like, oh, you have the Kinect?
Yeah.
Well, and Rob, to a big degree, and maybe this ties in with Kinect as well, was the Trojan horse. It was the thing that maybe didn't have the Trojans inside, but it was something that made the NES look separate from just a video game console.
Right.
Yeah. Because from all marketing purposes, they were very careful not to say the word video games. I mean, it was called the Nintendo Entertainment System for a reason. Rob was the robotic operating buddy.
And they cleverly made it look like a VCR.
Yes, with zero insertion force, which was both the nifty VCR-like feature, but also that system's biggest flaw.
I used to, as a massive Back to the Future fan, which we'll get to later, and a longtime DeLorean owner, I always loved as a kid, because I fell in love with that car as a kid with the movie. I always loved the NES because this reminds me of a gullwing door.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
No,
this is all unnecessary, and you didn't have to push down the games either, which is really funny.
Yeah,
you could just put them in. And we all discovered
really?
that.
I never knew that.
Yeah,
I always
it helps because it kind of bends up the pins so they connect a little bit better. But that's bad. That's like a design flaw that made it so all the NES 72-pin connectors eventually broke. But we all figured that out when we got Game Genie, because with Game Genie it just goes right in. you don't press down. And then it also fixes your pin connection because it like really crunches it and it makes it really tight.
Yeah, to find a working NES today that the pins aren't broken from the zero insertion force doohickey, it's really hard to do.
Does this one work?
This one, I replaced the 72-pin connector in.
Yeah, you have to.
Yes.
Yeah,
Sam
you
Claiborne,
absolutely have
ladies
to.
and
Yeah,
gentlemen.
no, Sam knows his stuff.
Yeah.
But
That
then,
might be coming home with me.
Going back to Rob, though, Rob didn't really work. Like, Gyromite, I mean, I enjoyed, but ultimately it wasn't because of Rob. It was more because of, like, the soundtrack and, sort of the arcade-like nature of. And most of that launch lineup did look like arcade-like games.
Yeah.
Some of them were ports, but they were ports that didn't look as held back as maybe the stuff you saw on Atari, which was also a big, sort of benefit
Was
for
Balloon
Nintendo.
Fight in that window?
No.
I didn't see it on the list,
so,
but
yeah.
it was if not, it was shortly
dang
after.
early.
Yeah,
I can't even begin to estimate the number of hours that I spent in the arcade playing Donkey Kong Jr. Math. So
It's not in the arcade. But early,
As an
there
infant.
was Donkey Kong Jr., and Mario Brothers were all really early NES games that were just straight up their arcade fare, and it looked really good on the NES. They were for some reason nerfed though. It's still unclear to me why Donkey Kong doesn't have the Cement Factory level, but they looked so presentable and nice. But the NES could do so much more, and it wasn't until Super Mario Brothers came out the next year that we really all saw that and started paying attention. Like really, nobody cared at launch. The NES was destined to be a flop until they had a key piece of software that just wasn't out yet.
Killer
which
app,
was
yeah.
Super Mario Brothers.
But once Super Mario Bros. Came out, we all went back and played these games, and I know them all, and I do like the launch titles for their quirky, like really Nintendo-developed games for the NES, and they made these home console games. They'd only made arcade games to that time.
I
It's really interesting.
played so much Excitebike as
Oh,
a
yeah.
kid. So much
That was a hit.
Excitebike. It was a fantastic motorcycle racing game. And my favorite part was I would spend what I remember as hours in the track editor, building my own custom tracks.
That blew my
except
mind.
You couldn't save them. There was no battery or memory on the cartridge.
Yeah.
So anytime you turned the system off, your track was gone. But I would build tracks and then race them and make the little like ones with tons of little bumps and try and get the biggest air you could.
Yeah.
That was the thing that really blew me away about Excitebike. Going back to it was I remember playing it for so long and not messing with the editor at all. And then when we discovered what the editor was, it was like, we can make our own tracks? Like, this is nuts.
I mean, that's why, for me, I'm such a big fan of Trials HD in that series, because when it came out, it sort of, to me, it was a sort of a spiritual successor to Excitebike in a lot of ways.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, and then look at marketing in terms of what, again, was very different from Atari. In terms of when you bought the game, the black box series, as they were, had it was still a stylized representation of the graphics, but it was what you were going to expect getting out of that game.
The opposite of
versus-
what Atari did, which was just big, colorful paintings of like Breakout is like an astronaut with this like rainbow projected on his face, and it's totally nuts. And NES did get there. I mean, Mega Man, come on. But,
classic.
But
It's like one of my favorite box arts of all
it's
time.
amazing.
Who is that dude?
No,
What's
but
he doing?
and there's good box art. There's like Castlevania. There's actually amazing box art with like Dracula in the background. But yeah, it's really clever how they're like, this is what you're getting. It actually looks this good. They have that picture of Ice Climber, and then there's like a big polar bear sunglasses. Like that's what this game is about.
Yeah, and then lastly, at least in terms of, again, learning from the mistakes of Atari, was the seal of quality, so to speak, or just the Nintendo seal, as it was.
Yeah.
Was really just a label to tell people buying games, hey, this is approved software. Like, this is actually legit.
But that
Nintendo had
seal was on
something
a
to do
lot
with.
of crummy games,
Well,
too.
Oh, that's fair.
And it was also used for nefarious purposes later on with like squeezing out third parties and all.
Sure, but look at the Atari situation, right? Anyone could put a game on an Atari, and Atari could do nothing about it.
Yeah.
So the fact that Nintendo made you have to go through licensing ultimately worked in their favor because it didn't oversaturate a market that was still trying to rebuild.
Yeah.
Still,
That's true.
still goes on today.
Yeah, their biggest problem though was they were a little too strict towards third parties, which would eventually come back to bite them.
It didn't harm the NES.
No,
That was quite a
absolutely not.
success.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it brought back video games. It put video games in houses again.
Yep, absolutely. So-
I just remember, I don't know how you guys got your NES, but for me, I grew up in a Catholic family, and so it was, generally a lot of people in a Catholic family, and when I made my first communion, that's kind of a big deal if you're Catholic and you're a kid, and your family will shower you with money on that occasion. You'll get cards, like first communion, congratulations cards, and they'll have like a check or 20 in there or something, and I took all that money, and I don't even remember how much the NES was, and that's how I bought it, because I'd seen it at friends' houses, and I knew about it, and I wanted it, and that's finally.
Do you remember
like
what game you associated? Was it Super Mario
Well, that's
Brothers
the thing.
era?
I didn't. I was born in 1980, so I was. I mean, I was around for the NES launch, but I actually didn't get one until a couple of years later.
Yeah.
So that's why I referenced earlier. I had the system, without the ROB and with the Super Mario Duck Hunt combo pack-in cartridge.
I think
The challenge set.
I think that was kind of the one that everybody had. Like, I feel like that was.
I started with the Power Pad.
Once again, I mean, Sam Claiborne over here. So.
I mean, I played the NES a lot before that, but I didn't get one until the Power Pad came out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I had the deluxe set. The thing I'm having trouble remembering was it 86 or 85? And I didn't know what a Nintendo was. We had an Atari for a day in my house, like just a day. My mom bought one, hooked it up, saw the quality of, I think it was Pac-Man or Miss Pac-Man, the port, and was like, this is garbage. And just packed it up, sent it back. And I cried my eyes out because I wanted that in the house, but she was like, no, this is not good enough. And then later we got an NES. I had a Rob the Robot. I remember being frustrated that Rob didn't really work with the game so much, so I just ripped the controller.
Buttons.
Yeah, it will press
and
the buttons.
And the game can just simulate that by, but instead this contraption of picking up gyroscopes is pressing a little lever that presses the buttons on the second controller.
Exactly. Well, I found a better solution. I basically handed the controller to my sister and was like, so you hit A or B and you get me through and we can do this.
Because it opens doors in the game,
Exactly, yeah.
He's a good-looking robot, though.
He is.
Great-looking robot.
He's a great-looking robot,
Sharp young man.
And that's why people have fond memories for it, even though, I mean, it's even in Smash Brothers today.
Yeah.
But honestly, it was
Star Fox 64.
A failure.
In Japan, Rob was never a pack-in. It was an accessory, and it's white and red like the Famicom there, and it looks incredible.
Yeah, it looks super cool.
It's also really rare from what I've read, too, in Japan, just saying.
Oh, in Japan.
Yeah,
I remember the Power Glove a lot more than I remember Rob.
Yeah. You guys remember...
An equally useless peripheral, by the way.
You guys remember Kung Fu at all? This was an NES port of a game made by IREM. It was a separate Japanese developer, not made in-house.
That's the one where you go left, up, right, up, like you just work through the dojo?
Absolutely.
That's when, oh yeah, I played the crap out of that game.
Yeah,
I felt old-timey when I was playing it, though. Like, that was one of those games I was like, oh, this feels like an older game.
Yeah.
It was like, 2 years old. Well, it's probably 4 years old, because in '83, I mean, it probably came out in Japan.
Absolutely, yeah. No, but just the fact that it still managed to capture the feel of what was the arcade version of that game, to me, was what worked for it. And I just like the idea of I mean, Kung Fu and martial arts were all the rage in the 80s. Like, everyone was trying to put it in everything. So I fell in love with that game, even though I came to it late.
Mario Brothers was a pretty good port.
Yeah.
Just not Super Mario Brothers, just Mario
Brothers. Yeah, just the original, absolutely.
Yeah, they did a good job with that one.
Yep. All right, so let's head over to, anybody play Oregon Trail? That was another big release.
That was on played that on like every middle school Apple computer.
Yeah.
We played. That was 2GS or something.
That was the thing, is like, if you grew up in the late 80s, early 90s, and you had dedicated computer lab time, which was a big time thing in California. Like they wanted to emphasize getting hands on a computer for kids, right? So I remember playing Oregon Trail every Wednesday for at least a couple of hours during computer lab, and I really loved it because you could
it's kind of a roguelike.
Yeah, you could name it after your friends, name the characters after
or you could name the characters after people that you didn't like, and then run into a river, or like
you've died of dysentery.
You wouldn't feed them. Like, it was a really great way for me to get back at kids.
Ford the river.
Yeah,
you have to stop and shoot the buffalo.
You'd be playing, and then you turn around and be like, "Hey, Chris, you drowned, sucker."
Well, it's like in that era, all I wanted to do was go home and play Nintendo. Like, that's all I wanted to do. And that's what every kid wanted to do. So, like, the fact that I could go to school and play anything, like, they would never have a Nintendo in school. Yeah. So we had to make do. And they had educational games, like Oregon Trail and Number Munchers and stuff like that. But Oregon Trail, like, it felt a little bit like janky and boring and old, but it was what you had, and it was a video game, and all I thought about at the time was
a friendship murder simulator.
Exactly, and also think about how much you learned. At least now you know how much oats you should take on a cross-country trip.
You know what typhoid and dysentery are.
And then I gotta get to Oregon.
Yeah,
I gotta get to Oregon.
Yeah.
And it was not easy to make it all the way to Oregon either.
I don't remember having ever made it.
Yeah, it was pretty rare.
Is that because we were bad? Like, if I played it now, could I figure it out, you think?
Yeah, but I think
would hope so.
I think the Oregon Trail today is a totally different game, because it's mostly you just buy like really fancy coffee, and then you just fly Virgin up to Portland, and that's it.
All right.
The future version of Oregon Trail. All right, so then let's switch over to movies, and possibly the biggest thing to come out of 1985, a movie that is near and dear to, I believe, everybody on this panel, Back to the Future.
Look.
Little film directed by Robert Zemeckis, written also by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale. That's right. Produced by Amblin Entertainment, which is Spielberg's unit. Starring Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, Leah Thompson, Crispin Glover, Thomas F. Wilson, and Claudia Wells. and probably one of the most hilarious sci-fi angles for a movie I'd seen, where a kid travels back in time, encounters his parents 30 years ago, and his mom accidentally falls in love with him.
Yeah, and they make out.
Oh, gross.
How's that?
To this day, anytime I watch that movie, the scene with the DeLorean reveal, the time machine reveal, where it
Coming off the back of the
comes
truck.
off the back of the truck, with I still get goosebumps every time. I know what's coming. I know like just note for note, and it's just like, oh, I love it.
Well, we're privileged to be in a room with a DeLorean owner from the past. I don't know anymore, but you ran with the DeLorean crowd for a long time.
So this was the DMC-12. We're talking about the
one and only
official
DeLorean.
one and only DeLorean.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, and it's because of that car. Because of that film that anyone knows what the car is, including me.
Yeah.
I mean, I came to be very well versed and really connect with the actual DeLorean backstory and the sort of history of the car. But yeah, I mean, everyone knows that car because of Back to the Future, and everyone will always know that car for generations.
It kind of came and went right when the movie came out.
The car, so the company went under in late 1982. There was this American company that acquired all the parts, what was left. They actually assembled some half-finished cars and parts that were left over into 1983 model year cars, and then it was over.
Yeah.
And they used.
It was kind of an ironic car in the movie.
Well, so I have a quick funny story about this. So as a longtime DeLorean owner, we would have DeLorean car shows every 2 years in a city around the country, and
that's where you get great pictures of like street parking of like
all
20
DeLoreans.
It's so funny.
I mean, there would be between 100 and 150 DeLoreans at each of these things, and Bob Gale was nice enough to always come to these shows. He's a total sweet guy, just still loves the movie and is very protective of it. He has said, like, yeah, Universal is not making a Back to the Future 4 or any other Back to the Future film without Bob Zemeckis and I, and we're not having any part of that. You know, he appreciates the three as they stand, but
Even the third one?
Yes, stop it. Stop it.
Okay.
And it somehow came up that he told a story about how during the making of the film, of course, there was the whole thing with Eric Stoltz. They filmed a bunch of stuff with him, and
so Eric Stoltz was Michael J. Fox's
original
role. And
Marty
why did they
McFly.
not like it?
They said that he just wasn't the right fit
It just
for the
wasn't
role, and
fitting.
if I've read interviews with Eric Stoltz where he completely agrees. Yeah. He feels like he was
I didn't need that money.
potentially
Like the
potentially
chemistry
miscast with the rest of the cast.
And they had originally wanted Michael J. Fox, but he was tied up with family ties. But they
He was
eventually
family tied up.
obviously worked it up.
Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, the Bob Gale story at the DeLorean car show is apparently during the making of the film, there was at one point where Universal came to Zemeckis and Bob Gale and said, you know, we've got Ford interested. They want to maybe sponsor, get the car, pay us to put the Mustang in the movie, and I won't repeat it because we're censoring ourselves here. Yeah, but Bob Gale said in that meeting, Doc Brown does not drive an effing Mustang. And it was just the room at the car show, like when he tells the story, just erupted. That night, people had made like silk screen T-shirts of Doc Brown does not drive an effing Mustang.
Well, think about what the Mustang looked like in 1985. It was like a sedan.
It was hot garbage. I mean,
it was kind of big.
I used to have it was ridiculous. It was the stupidest looking Mustang. I had an '88 Mustang, but it looked ridiculous.
Yeah, they looked
It was an
awful.
old man car.
Yeah, totally.
I'm incredibly biased, but
it's in Goonies.
I think
there
Yes,
isn't
it is.
one of those
Yeah,
in
it is in
Goonies.
I'm super biased, but I very much think that the DeLorean is practically like the fourth lead in that film. Like
is,
if it had been any other vehicle, it just would not.
Yeah.
Like I actually think the film would still be a great film, but it is a big reason why that film is so
you look at that
memorable.
car and like everything about it says like, I don't know why it says Time Machine or Science Mobile or whatever you want to label it, but rolling doors, in it, like a fiberglass chassis, just
the stainless
brushless
steel body is what
stainless
you're
steel
referring
body
to, yeah.
also was just like, whoa. But even the gull wing doors, like there weren't that many cars that had that.
Well, no, there was
Not in the-
there was a car called the Bricklin in the 70s that had a oddly similar backstory to the DeLorean, where it was made by this like crazy
the
entrepreneur.
Lamborghini's doors went up like
They were
that.
called
something else.
scissor doors.
Scissor doors.
But yeah, like basically the only other well-known car that had gull-wing doors was the Mercedes 300 SL in the 1950s, which was the first car to do it. And that's actually, when you read his autobiography, John DeLorean, that's why he put gull wings. One of the reasons why he put gull wings on the DeLorean is because he loved it on that Mercedes when he was young.
So this has been Cars of 1985.
Yeah,
Thanks for tuning in.
It's all part of
It is all part of Back to the Future. I think the thing that stands out to me about Back to the Future to this day is that, like Ghostbusters the year prior, it stands out as an interesting mashup of sci-fi and comedy. Yeah. Like it's something that made it super accessible and didn't feel just super sci-fi.
Yeah. It's also a perfectly paced film.
It is.
It is.
The pacing and the writing are so on point in that movie, and like
every performance too.
Yeah. And we were flying back from Boston a few months ago, and one of the guys that works for IGN was watching it on his laptop, and I was amazed, having not seen it in a few years. Like, I could not take my eyes off of his screen. Like, I was doing my own thing, but I kept watching Back to the Future because it's a film that demands your attention because of the way, I think not only because of the nostalgia over it, but it's just, it looks great, it feels great, it has a great story. It's, you know, in my eyes, it's a perfect film.
There's a standing rule. I mean, if you pass it by, if it's on TV, you're going to stop and watch it.
Absolutely.
Yes,
You will
it is one
stop
of the few movies that does that. No, I completely agree.
I like also how it's serialized. By the ending, there's a cliffhanger and like the big, like, you know, DeLorean flying in, like reveal at the end, and you know there's gonna be another one. And like I'm okay with the sequels, but like that was just so cool. This thing.
Yeah, that blew my mind as a kid because even though like Empire Strikes Back ends in just a bad way, like I'll never forget the ending of that movie because it was the first time I saw a movie where the heroes lost. I was like, what? That's awful. Like, what's going on? But Back to the Future was the only other standout in my mind from that era just because of the way it ended and that there was more story to tell, but they weren't going to tell you right now.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I remember as a kid seeing this, you know, growing up in New York and just going, I need to see that next movie.
And there's
I
like
didn't
a
see it for a
freaking
very
trailer
long time.
in the end of the second one.
Yeah.
Yes,
The funny thing about the ending of the first one is they showed the test screeners to audiences with that last sequence in black and white because none of the special effects had been added in because they were afraid that people would hate it. They were afraid that people would be like, well, where's the rest of the story? So they didn't finish the movie until they had shown it to test audiences and had gotten the reaction like, yes, it was awesome, and we definitely want more of it.
So fun fact, you may know that Back to the Future 2 and 3 were shot back to back, which is much more common practice today. They were shot under a code name in order to try and maintain secrecy while they were shooting it, and the code name of the film was Paradox.
Oh, I like that. I like that a lot.
Blue Harvest. Blue Harvest, exactly. That's the code name for Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
Those like shirts you see from Blue Harvest,
Blue Harvest
so cool.
shirts,
I'd love to see what the Paradox one looked like.
Yeah.
Like they have crew branding, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Last thing I'll leave off with before we switch over to our next film. I went back and watched a review of Siskel and Ebert because you have to whenever you're talking about an 80s movie. And this quote from Roger Ebert stuck out to me where he said, everyone grows up thinking, my parents were never old. The parents, this is the secret parents have from kids, they don't think they're ever old. This movie plays with the paradox in such a beautiful way that it's not just a time travel picture and not just an action picture. And that quote like really resonated with me because it's true. I feel like the older we get, the more we're like, I'm still cool. And it's like, oh, wait, you're the parent in the room, so you...
my daughter will have no idea of, like her image of me forever will be as probably, you know, late 30s, early 40s guy by the time she sort of really gets old enough to have that sort of core memory of me. Absolutely. Like, no, I was in my 20s once and a teenager once.
I owned a tiger toy that I'm holding right now.
That was one of the things that was like really interesting. I watched it last night.
Okay.
This is hers, by the way, Sam. Okay, sure. We'll get to that.
I haven't seen it in a while, a couple years. Like, actually sat down and watched it, and my girlfriend grew up not really wasn't a huge fan of it. So when I was watching it last night, A, she was impressed by the idiot grin I had on my face the whole time, and B, her biggest takeaway was at the end of the movie. I was like, well, "What do you think?" And she's like, I really love the way that the parents ended up because they have this like sea change from who they are at the beginning of the movie, and I thought that was really funny. I was like, yeah, I hadn't really considered that. That is really cool.
And that gave Crispin Glover enough money to do all the crazy stuff he did for the rest of his career.
Now, Biff, make sure 2 coats of wax this time, okay?
There you go, there you go. All right, so then our next film is a little movie called The Goonies, which was directed by Richard Donner, written by Spielberg and Chris Columbus, starring a bunch of child actors: Sean Astin, Josh Brolin, Jeff Cohen, Corey Feldman, Cary Green, Martha Plimpton, Jonathan Kekwan, and John, not a teen actor at the time, John Matzuzak. Am I saying his last name right?
I'll
he
give
was
it to you.
Sloth. But anyway, talk about this film. This was a big.
This is
film
one of
for
my
a lot
favorite
people.
movies ever.
So, fun
I
fact,
like this so much better than any other movie that I can think of that doesn't have Star Wars in front of it.
I have a sort of a weird tradition that I've had pretty much my whole life of if it's one of those days where it's just super gray and rainy all day,
Portland weather.
I call those Goonies days, and I will watch the film.
That's awesome.
Wow.
And I did that. It doesn't rain in San Francisco here anymore, but it did once for like one day back in December when we were supposed to have the superstorm of the century. Turned out it just rained a little all day. But so I watched Goonies just a few months ago, and I don't know. I came to try and remember when exactly did this come out, and turns out the Goonies came out 1 month after Back to the Future.
Yeah.
2 generational classics within 30 days of each
Both
other.
produced by
Unbelievable.
Spielberg.
Both with
also.
Spielberg's
Yeah.
fingerprints on them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, I always liked. When I grew up, I grew up near like a forest or the cave, and like I could go exploring, and it was like a big part of my childhood.
Yeah.
And I really and there's treasure. There's a rumor of treasure in this creek I grew up next to, that like, and everybody in town knew this is in Iowa City, and so this film like was what my life was about. Is about these kids going to find freaking treasure like on their own, but with a treasure map. I just thought that was so cool. And then my other big interest at the time, I love mini golf. And like, this is a freaking movie about a mini golf course. Like the waterfalls, water slides. It's like everything in it. It strikes those like adventure, like kids summer fun things chords.
That movie is simultaneously, I mean, it's brilliant on its own, but it just also triggers so much nostalgia for me because, you know, we are the last generation that grew up where we could just ride our bikes and just go. You know, now you can't be out of your parents' sight. You've got to be tethered in some way all the time for safety reasons. And but yeah, you know, you just go off and play with your friends and just be back when the streetlights come on.
Yeah. And well, I think what really lends Goonies that sense of nostalgia is that the kids' performances are so genuine.
Yes.
And it's
how
because
hectic must they have that set been?
it's because Donner let those kids be kids. Like
They
a lot of
just
those
chat.
lines are improv. Like
say the
there's
S
so
word
many
a
times.
lot.
Yeah, they do drop
great.
the S-bomb. There's like a lot of crosstalk, which doesn't really happen a lot. And I read things like he didn't show them the pirate ship until the day that they
so it
were
was a
until the
genuine
day that they were
surprise.
on set to shoot that. So when you see them like so surprised at the sight of that ship, it's because they hadn't seen it yet.
You're talking about perfect pacing with Back to the Future. This is another film perfectly paced. Every movie now has to be 2.5 or 3 hours long, and everything. A lot of things are bloated. Back in the 80s, it was okay for a movie to be an hour and a half, 2 hours max, and it's just like go, go, go.
Yeah, I hate to disagree, but I feel like the pacing is the one thing that the Goonies doesn't do great because I feel like it's perfectly paced right up until the end, and then they just cram all the ending together. Like
That's
why
what kids kinda need.
Like why
I
is
can
that
agree- I
bank
can agree
lender?
with
Why is
that.
that bank lender at the beach? Like he obviously sees there's this huge like heartwarming moment, and he's like, "See, you guys are really like bonding here, but I'm here to take your house." Like
I love
he
the
couldn't
pizza
have waited.
order at the end of that movie, and
Yeah.
then when they'd have that flub about how scary the octopus was.
Yeah.
You know what? That movie always struck a chord with me too because they were big kids, and you watch movies when you're a kid. The movies you really like have kids a little bit older than you in them,
Right.
And that's just like a thing that's just commonly known. You target audiences for that way, but I remember this being all big, and that's one of those the movie I think of where it's like when I crossed that threshold and started seeing them as like really little kids, they all look really strange to me now. And like I just remember them seeing Ralph Mouth was like the coolest character in anything at the time, and I just thought he was so cool. And then now I'm like, oh man, that's a little kid acting like a jerk.
Yeah.
So let's
such a jerk.
let's BuzzFeed it up for a second. Which Goonie are you? Who did you most relate to?
Oh man.
Everybody is Sean Astin.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think everybody is Sean Astin.
Maybe Troy.
Yeah, I don't know if I can pick one. I will say though that it did strike me as a special film just because of the way it was sort of Raiders of the Lost Ark, but for kids.
But for kids.
Okay, you're
Very,
Data.
very, very,
Yeah, you're-
absolutely. Yeah, no, I'll take it. I was
Slick
going to say
shoes.
that actually.
$50 bill.
I have asthma, so I was definitely a Mikey.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So our next film, which I don't have a ton to say about, but I hope maybe you guys can, is Rambo: First Blood,
Ooh, it's,
Part 2. Part 2. Got to put that out there.
Getting shot at in that movie, huh?
I've
Actually,
seen-
I've never seen it. So.
I've seen the first part of it. That's the movie that took First Blood, which is like kind of an interesting, film that's like, professionally made and stuff into like a stupid action movie that like got emulated by everybody.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, it was parodied in like what, Hot Shots or Hot Shots Part 2, one of those. And
yeah,
Yes, it absolutely
it was
That's
made
right.
into 100 NES games.
I had the games; they were terrible. I had the toys too, which is kind of awful if you think about it. Just because Rambo is all about like.
Well, I was talking about there's
shooting up the
RoboCop
place.
toys too.
Yeah.
the movie's ultra violent.
Yep,
it's like
absolutely.
really adult themes in it and stuff. But yeah, Rambo was targeted at just the same people that G.I. Joe was.
Rambo was definitely, I mean, it basically was the blueprint for almost every 80s action film.
All right, I'll take it, especially because the director George P. Cosmatos, I want to say that's his last name. He directed or worked on a bunch of stuff Stallone worked on. Just putting that out
And
there.
also, by the way, Sylvester Stallone, super underrated talent in Hollywood. Hold
Do
on.
people rate him?
He wrote a lot of great film. He did everything in the first Rocky, which is
Also, no one rocks a mullet like him.
absolutely.
No,
Absolutely.
not.
King of the 80s mullets.
Yep. Great bounce on it.
I don't
All right,
know.
so then.
There's big trouble
And
in
the law.
entire town for you.
In television, we had Thundercats, which was early 1985. This one stands out a lot in my mind. So what I never realized, though, about this show was that it was basically animated by a studio in Japan, the Pacific Animation Corporation. Like, I did not
You could totally
know that.
see that in the character
You
design.
could,
Yeah.
especially in the intro. The intro itself was just gorgeous.
Remember it had that awesome theme song and they're all like running. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, it was just, I just repeated the name of it.
Thunder.
Yeah.
Oh!
It was a
Exactly.
big part of animation at the time, especially Japanese animation, to mask that from United States audience because there was a lot of Japanese anti-sentiment in the United States at the time. And I think a lot of things, even the Nintendo, people tried to cover up as much as possible that stuff was from Japan. And I just talked to you about this the other day because I was like, wasn't Thundercats a Japanese animated show? And you were like, actually, I don't know. And then we looked it up.
and was like,
surprising.
what? Yeah, but I do remember, it's funny though, because I didn't really realize it at the time, but now looking at it from an older perspective, like even the way Mum Ra comes out and he has this speech, this almost song that he delivers every time, and how it never occurred to me that that's like something I had seen very commonly in other Japanese cartoons or even in Pokemon. Like Pokemon the Team Rocket intro, you know what I'm saying? Like that blew my mind when I realized. I was just like, how did I not pick this up? Because I was pretty good at knowing, hey, that's from Japan, that's pretty cool. And I thought only the intro was.
Even when you were a tiny kid?
Even as a kid, yeah. No, because you could tell when the quality of the animation was really good, somewhere between ages, I don't know, like between 10 or older, somewhere someone had told me, hey, really good animated stuff comes from
Japan.
Wow.
Yeah, it doesn't come from America.
That's back when it was called Japanimation. Before
Yes.
it was anime.
Oh, that word. Yeah, no, for sure.
I remember, was it Snarf? Is that the
Yes.
little
Yes.
annoying cat's name?
Snarf.
Yes, all the time.
How are the toys for? I remember them like they have.
I think I had the
vehicles.
plastics, the sword.
The sword. Yeah, I was going to say
sword.
that's the thing that I remember the most about the Thundercats.
The
movie is
hilt, you'd hold it up to your face, and the hilt kind of did this around your eyes.
Yep.
Did it light up?
It would light
I
up. It
don't
would shoot
think
the
it did at the
well,
time.
Some of them did. I think some of them did, but some of them didn't. But it had. It would project the Thundercats logo.
Yeah.
I had some of the
Yeah.
toys
That's
too.
awesome.
Yeah, like I remember the Lionel toy was pretty good. It had like some kind of like chopping action, like with a switch on the back, like most toys ended up being. Another big commercial for toys that was at least half an hour long was also G.I. Joe, a real American hero.
I was a Transformers kid and didn't. I mean, I have a lot of friends that had a pile of G.I. Joes, but yeah, I was sort of, for some reason, in my recollection of my childhood in New Jersey, it was kind of like Transformers or G.I. Joe, but not really both.
Well, I was a
Always
particular
Transformers.
kid like that too. Like I really picked what I liked.
Yeah.
And like I really liked Lego, but I wouldn't like G.I. Joe and stuff like that. It was really strange. That's
certainly
what makes good critics, though, right?
I've seen the cartoon and everything, but yeah, that was always sort of the other thing for me.
Yeah, I was never a G.I. Joe kid myself. I think the thing that I associate G.I. Joe with the most is
destroying them?
Yeah, once the toys weren't cool anymore, just finding clever ways to destroy my friends' G.I.
They
Joes.
smelled so weird when you burned them. They're so they
You
first of
burned
all
G.I. Joe.
Oh yeah, everybody did. They turn. They make a black smoke
Yeah.
and they burn so fast. It's like you hold a match to a G.I. Joe and it just goes.
All of our
Isn't that a
toys back in
Simpsons
the
joke?
80s were made of toxic,
Oh no,
horrible
that's an Army
things.
Man where he's got the magnifying glass. See you in hell, soldier.
It's just like how all 80s toys were like nice, high-quality die-cast metal, and then in the after that, everything went plastic and cheap.
Well, it's 'cause it hurt. The die-cast metal hurt though.
Well,
Like, you
but
pinch a finger in that thing.
You get a sibling to whale one of those
Bill-
things at you?
I got a
Build
story
character.
I got a good story about burning G.I. Joes. I was into model rockets.
Okay.
And not into GI Joes because they were for kids. Because I was a little bit older at the time, and my friend and I would go to the hobby store, and you could get model rocket engines, which basically have gunpowder inside. I don't know what's inside them, but it's silver and it burns like the Dickens. It's crazy. And you would take it out, and we would like cover like a G.I. Joe tank or something with it, and light it. The whole thing would just go blap, and just like melt down in like seconds.
You are the kid next door in Toy Story 1.
Yeah, you're Sid.
You.
You're
Sid.
But it was we were doing this, and and all of a sudden it just went boom, you know, like normal. But he was a little bit too close at the time, and there's a lot of smoke. And he turns around, his eyebrows are gone. Completely gone. Like no eyebrows. And they left these little flakes, like gray ash. And he wiped it
How did
off,
he
and they're
explain
gone.
it to his parents? What
That was the big problem. And I can't remember how it ended up being reconciled because I left, but he got in so much trouble.
Oh, man.
And his eyebrows grew back very slowly.
Very interesting.
G.I. Joe.
Oh, man. Yeah, G.I. Joe. No, but really, it's still, like, I remember the toys being really cool. I wasn't a huge G.I. Joe fan per se, also big Transformers guy, but either show was a big vehicle for you buying toys, essentially. That's all it,
But we didn't
sort of
care.
was.
We loved it as kids.
Yeah, and there was nothing wrong with that. 1985 also had She-Ra, Princess of Power, which was, you know, the
Don't
girls'
really remember
He-Man.
it well. Yeah,
don't remember it
I
well.
remember it existing, but as a boy in the 80s, you know, it was not aimed at me.
Yeah, no, same. So then in comics, we had, this is an awesome comic, possibly your favorite, I want to bet, judging by who's sitting next to you, Calvin and Hobbes, which started November 1985. And would run all the way to 1995.
Well, all the way makes it sound like a long time. That was the big thing, is Bill Watterson, the author, only went 10 years, whereas, you know, Peanuts and Garfield just went on and on till the point where they were a parody, they were an unfunny shadow of themselves. And Watterson, turns out he's a fascinating guy. He famously never licensed. He refused all licensing opportunities, which would have made him tens, if not hundreds, of millions of dollars. I mean, I'm sure he did well just from the anthologies, the books that have lived on and continue to sell. But this was never a thing that they officially licensed. Because I started reading, I decided I got sick of reading my 3-year-old dumb little kids books, and I thought, let me try Calvin and Hobbes, because it's about a 6-year-old boy and his stuffed tiger who comes to life for him, and it's just it's all about his imagination and what's the endless possibilities. And she instantly took to it. We're now on our second. I have the full, complete collection, hardbound 3-volume thing. We're 2/3 of the way through our second read through, and then we'll just keep going as long as she's interested in it, because I love reading it. But yeah, Bill Watterson, for him it really was all about the art. That's all he ever cared about. He never wanted it to be a toy, a merchandising opportunity, which is interesting because reading an interview with him, he rarely gives interviews also. He's a recluse. There's a new Calvin and Hobbes book out that doesn't have any new comics in it, but it's, I forget the name of it, but it's pairs, you can look it up on Amazon or wherever. It was an accompaniment to an art show he did in Ohio, his home state, in 2014. And so the first 30 pages of the book are a big sit-down interview with him, which is a rare thing. And he talks about the Peanuts, for him growing up, was a huge thing. And so it's almost ironic that he grew up loving and worshiping the Peanuts, which were merchandised to hell and back.
That's right.
And then he took the opposite approach. But for me, I think Calvin and Hobbes is the greatest comic strip of all time.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I mean, better to leave the party.
Kathy?
But yeah, I mean, let's all remember the final Calvin and Hobbes strip on New Year's Eve, December 31st, 1995, which is, I don't know, maybe we'll be able to put it up on the screen or something if we have the power of editing there. But it's all black and white except them, even though it's a Sunday color page, and it's Calvin and Hobbes, and there's a fresh winter snow falling on the ground, and they're just sledding through, talking about how, wow, look at the day, everything's brand new, everything's fresh, anything can happen. And Calvin says to Hobbes, in the last panel, it's a magical world, Hobbes, old buddy. let's go exploring, and then that's it. And it's like the perfect
send off
to it. But between Spaceman Spiff, the little spaceman character that's in his head, or Tracer Bullet, or the Get Rid of Slimy Girls club they had where they would torment Susie Durkins, the neighbor. It's just Calvin and Hobbes is at times just gut-bustingly hilarious, and at times completely touching and sweet too. And it's been a pleasure for me to share it with my 3-year-old, and it's just I still feel like it's just like it still moves me every time I read it, whether it's in a humorous way or in an emotional way. And so I just thought Santa had this whipped up.
Yeah, that's a really cool
I found
thing.
someone on Etsy, which is like a big arts and crafts website.
You know what Etsy is?
Who did? Well, I don't know, but
I like how you used quotes when you said Santa just now.
Whatever. But what I love about this is that it's like exact down to the number of stripes. It's so well done, and my daughter loves it. So I thought I would bring it to the shoot.
The comic was the first time when I read it, I didn't really know what I was getting into at first. Like the first time I encountered Calvin and Hobbes, which, by the way, I think I just didn't know what it was about. And then when I realized, holy cow, to everyone else, that's not a tiger. Like that's a doll. And I was like, this is so smart. And then constantly reading and finding like just really smart, very insightful at times too, as you say.
Oh, there was some social commentary laden in there from time to time too.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, my uncle was really into Calvin and Hobbes, and I remember he was the one that sort of introduced me to the strip through different anthology books, like you were saying. Not necessarily the giant tomes like you've got, but like they did these like sort of annuals and stuff that I would read. And like you were saying, just going back to them today, I think there's something innately simple but elegant in both the art form and the story that he's trying to tell. And it's kind of like we were talking about in the Goonies, right? There's something so relatable about being that age and creating something inside yourself.
And Watterson's art is amazing.
Yeah,
by the way,
I just want to point out he never peed on anything.
That's true.
Yeah. No, but I think what was definitely relatable was just the imagination. And just remembering that and tapping into that. Like the writing really taps into, just the average mind of you say it was 6?
6.
Yeah, you think
First
back
grader.
to that time where you were, a kid running around the house and the adventures you went through.
And the other great thing about Calvin and Hobbes, I mean, if you have kids, I highly encourage you to try reading it with them, see if they like it. But Calvin and Hobbes is mostly very timeless. There are some references here and there, to like old phones or computers or sort of other 80s technology. And there are a couple of specific call-outs. Like a running joke was that Calvin would say, "Hey, Dad, election's coming up. Are you gonna win the election to be Dad again?" And he would, sometimes they would drop like, "Oh, it's 1988." But for the most part, it's completely timeless, and it could exist. It could be now, it could be the 80s, it could be the 50s, it could be any time.
All right. Well, in the next episode of The History of Awesome, it is still the 80s, it's 1986, and the game that shaped the Nintendo Entertainment System was actually played by everyone, which was Super Mario Brothers. But that's for the next episode. Thank you, Ryan, thank you, Zach, and thank you, Sam.
Thanks,
I'm
Jose.
Jose, and once again, keep it right here for more History of Awesome on IGN.